Well, sure, Sydney Sweeney has great genes, but you know what's even more powerful than her genetics? Her mindset, because history shows us that Hollywood has always celebrated its bombshells. But for so many of them, that crown came with a curse. Typecasting, scandals, and often heartbreak. Sydney? She's rewriting the script. She's somehow dodging the traps that swallowed others whole and building something we haven't really seen before. So I went down the rabbit hole, studied her moves, her interviews, her patterns, and I found 5 power plays and psychological hacks she's been using. And whether you realize it or not, that's why we're all so insanely drawn to her. Welcome to the Boss Babe Blueprint, the space where I decode the self-mastery, strategies, and science behind today's most iconic women. So while you sip the tea, you also level up. So let's start right at the beginning, her childhood. Because that's a huge reason why we all a bit messed up in the head. At just 12 years old, when she was invited to audition for a zombie film, she prepared a 5-year business plan, mapping out exactly how her acting career could unfold. And remember, this was long before ChatGPT existed. And of course, her plan worked. Her parents drove her from Idaho to Los Angeles for that audition. However, the family's relocation strained their finances so heavily that they eventually filed for bankruptcy and later divorced. And Sydney couldn't help but blame herself for her parents' failed marriage. And that kind of thing breaks you as a child. From a young age, her mindset didn't just come from privilege, it came from loss. Psychologists call this compensatory control. When life feels unstable, you double down on what you can control. For Sydney, that was her career, and that's what sets her apart. Yes, she has beauty, talent, amazing genes, and charisma. But underneath it all, she has this fire, this calculated drive and resilience that she rarely shows to the public. Long before her breakthrough as Cassie in Euphoria, she was already putting in the work. But despite her big break on the show, the headlines weren't about her acting at first. They were about how heavily the show sexualized her character. And in some way, Sydney Sweeney as well. This is where her second strategy comes into play. Now, most people in that situation would feel uncomfortable, maybe even play defense or retreat from the narrative. However, Sydney did the opposite. She leaned into it. She knew exactly what people were talking about, and instead of acting naive or silent, she made herself part of the conversation. She even joked publicly that her grandfather thought she had the best breasts in Hollywood. But there's a lesson here. Whatever makes you stand out, whether it's your skills, your personality, your background, or even something others label as a flaw, you can choose to own it, because if you don't, someone else will use it against you. Like my girl, Cat's Eye Sophia, would say, to be cringe is to be free. And honestly, that's the bigger takeaway. When life hands you attention, positive or negative, you can either shrink from it or shape it. And the people who shape it are the ones who win. However, what happens when the box people put you in doesn't reflect who you really are? What if you know you're so much more than the label? That's where Sydney's next power move comes in. When that stereotype was at its peak, she flipped the script. Out of nowhere, she started posting photos of herself fixing cars, working on engines, getting grease on her hands, and people were stunned. The duality was almost shocking. How could someone so feminine do something so technical and masculine? Suddenly, her attractiveness wasn't just about the male gaze, it was about depth, range, and power. Now here's the thing, this wasn't random. Very few people in the public eye post things just because. Everything is intentional. Every caption, every photo, every angle is part of a larger narrative. I'm not saying she faked it, I'm saying she was strategic. She wanted to make sure she wasn't trapped in one box, the Hollywood bombshell. She wanted to show the world another side. And this brings us to the next lesson. Never conform to the box people try to put you in. Especially for women, the world is always trying to label you. If you're ambitious, you're a workaholic. If you're nurturing, you're just motherly. And Sydney understood that brilliantly. She didn't waste time denying the narrative. Instead, she said, sure, I can be that, but I can also be this. She let her actions expand the story. It was brand diversification. Sydney was doing the same thing with her career, and you can do it too. If someone tells you you're just the quiet, sweet girl and nothing more, don't argue. Show them your other side. Go lift weights, post the push-ups, share the poetry you wrote. Let them see what you're capable of. However, not all of her tactics were sweet or positive. Some were actually quite dark and tapped into hidden desires and shadows of human psychology. And you know this better than most. That's exactly what makes dark psychology so fascinating. One of the most cunning moves, which came at the expense of people close to her, was the romance allegations with her co-star Glenn Powell in Anybody But You. It was widely rumored that the two were secretly hooking up despite both of them being in long-term committed relationships. The situation spiraled so far out of control that her Glenn Powell long-term girlfriend at the time broke up with him because of all the speculation. The story was everywhere. But what made this case wild was that Sydney herself leaned into it. She even joked about it on SNL, all while still being in a very public, supposedly happy relationship with her boyfriend. From a PR perspective, you can see why she might have done it. Her fiancé was also one of the producers of the film, which meant he had to play along and swallow the gossip because the movie's success mattered more. And in the end, the film was a massive hit. Not because it was a masterpiece, it was mid at best, but because the marketing made it unmissable. A lot of people call that manipulative. And this is where dark psychology comes in. The principle of scarcity and intrigue works like a magnet. When something feels just out of reach or shrouded in mystery, people can't look away. Sydney never confirmed the rumor, but she never denied it either. However, I saved my most favorite and intense strategy for the end. The bathwater soap moment in 2025. Now, hate on it and question feminism as much as you want, but the product sold out instantly. Not because it was the world's greatest product idea, but because it was one of the most insane examples of product market fit we've ever seen. But the craziest part is that Sydney pitched the idea herself. That alone shows how clearly she understands what people associate with her, and more importantly, what actually sells. And here's something most people never think about. We all carry an idea of who we are, but the truth is that image almost never matches how the world actually sees us. A really powerful exercise is to ask 3 very different people what they think of you: a close friend, a family member, and even someone who barely knows you. You'll probably get 3 completely different answers. And what's even more fascinating is that your own perception of yourself might be totally different from all of them. But here's why this matters. When you understand how others see you, you can adjust. If your friends think you're cold or distant, but you know you're actually caring, then you'll realize you need to show it more clearly. If people think you're hilarious while you just think you're awkward, that's proof that your self-doubt is lying to you. For celebrities, however, this awareness is incredibly rare. Most of them live inside a bubble. They believe their own version of themselves, and social media only reinforces it. Millions of likes and curated comments create an echo chamber where they only see what they want to see. But Sydney Sweeney? She's different. She seems to know exactly how people perceive her, both the good and the bad, which is probably why she said yes to the American Eagle campaign. It was tailor-made for her, no pun intended. And American Eagle knew exactly what they were doing. They expected the backlash, they expected the noise, but they also knew Sydney could flip controversy into conversation. The result? Their stock values spiked nearly 40% overnight. That's not just a win for the brand, and that's proof Sydney is more than a face. She's an ambassador who can take the heat and turn it into momentum. She understands the power of scarcity and intrigue. She knows when to lean into perception instead of fighting it. She refuses to stay trapped in any box, and she isn't afraid to use strategy and gameplay over just being real. Put together, these are the 5 big lessons that make her one of the most fascinating case studies in Hollywood right now. If this breakdown gave you a new perspective, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because we've got plenty more stories like this coming your way. Which celebrity mindset or marketing move should we break down next? Drop it in the comments and you might just see your idea in the next video. And remember the golden rule: If they're calling you difficult, dramatic, or even cringe, then you're probably doing something right.